I'm Avery Hayes, and I was 31 when I realized the worst kind of family cruelty is their silence when you're being attacked. It's when they dismiss your life's work as just a hobby. That's why when my brother Daniel raised his glass at Christmas dinner and called me a worthless barista, and my parents just watched, I knew I had to act. They thought I was trapped, but in my hand was the secret, my proof. That night I was finally ready to expose the truth. The daughter they ignored was the founder of a billion-dollar company. I promised myself their silence was going to cost them their pride, and I was going to make them pay. The Christmas lights blinked across the living room of my parents' Georgian-style home in Greenwood Hills, just outside Atlanta. The house was dressed in garlands of poinsettias, the table heavy with turkey red wine and plum pudding. Everything sparkled with warmth, yet underneath the glow was the same cold current that had always run through my family. I reached for a slice of roasted turkey, when Daniel, my older brother, let out a sharp laugh that cut through the holiday music. Still stuck making lattes, Avery. You'll always be a worthless barista. The words fell like shards of glass. The aunts and uncles who barely knew what I had done in the last 3 years joined his laughter, their voices sharp, cruel, united. My parents, Richard and Diane, only clinked their Pinot Noir glasses together. Not a word came to defend me. Heat burned up my neck, my heart pounding against my ribs as if trying to escape. It felt as though the entire world had turned its eyes on me, pointing, mocking, stripping me bare at my own family's Christmas dinner. But what they didn't know, what not one of them had even imagined, was that inside my black clutch bag sat my phone screen primed and ready. One tap and silence would fall over this gilded cage. A single clip on Channel 12 News was waiting a report that would flip their laughter into stunned disbelief. They called me a worthless barista. Soon enough, they were about to see the truth. I was 31 years old, and though I had long since moved out of this house each Christmas, dragged me back into its ritual of humiliation. Greenwood Hills was wealthy old money wrapped in suburban charm. My parents adored the image it gave them, an image built around Daniel. He was the chosen heir, the one they always introduced with pride. He was in his late 30s now, a managing director at a local investment bank. It wasn't remarkable work, but in my father's eyes, it was pedigree. To them, it meant Daniel was a man who mattered. The way he smiled, smug and full of ownership, reminded me of every Christmas before, when he would dominate the table with his booming voice and I would shrink into the background. For over an hour, I listened in silence as they traded stories about market funds' inheritance clauses and my mother's expensive golf trips. I knew better than to interject. In this family, my words were not currency. Uncle Gary, the realtor, who measured human worth in cash, sneered. At least Daniel makes money with money. Avery's just doodling with milk foam. My skin burned. They didn't know, couldn't know what I had built. To them, I was still the girl behind the counter, smiling at customers sweeping floors. I forced myself to breathe evenly. You're right, Daniel. No shares, no stock, no real career. Just coffee and foam. My voice was calm, almost too calm. But sometimes the people making foam end up owning more than numbers on a trading floor. They laughed louder, brushing it off as the sad protest of the family failure. My father kept his eyes on his turkey. My mother raised her glass toward Aunt Eleanor. Not one looked in my direction. Their betrayal hurt more than the words. Their silence was a verdict. A memory pierced me then. I was 10, clutching a trophy for winning the state math competition. My mother placed it in a kitchen cabinet half hidden behind a flour canister. Weeks later, Daniel made the junior varsity baseball team, not even the starters. That night, balloons filled the living room and neighbors came by to celebrate. I was invisible, my triumph erased. That pattern of favoritism had stretched across decades, cutting me away piece by piece until all that remained was a hard, quiet fury. But tonight, that fury had transformed into fire. Tonight, I wasn't the one shrinking. Tonight, karma was mine to deliver. Inside my clutch, my phone buzzed once. The timer had gone off. On Channel 12 News, a special report was about to air, one that featured the Phoenix Collective, the cafe chain I had built in silence, brick by brick, while my family laughed at me. For 3 years, I had worked in the shadows using decentralized finance or DeFi to raise capital. Customers bought digital tokens that granted them voting rights and internal shares. They weren't just buyers, they were owners. That model had turned a single storefront into a billion-dollar company. My company. And in time, everyone at this table would know. Daniel stood glass of Pinot Noir, high grin, wide and cruel. "Let's raise a glass to Avery," he announced, his voice booming. "To our family's permanent barista. May she get enough tips to pay her heating bill this year." The laughter was deafening, sharp enough to slice the air. I stared at my parents. Richard's eyes stayed on his plate. Diane sipped her wine. Their silence pressed down heavier than Daniel's insult. In that silence, something shifted in me. Pain evaporated. What filled me was a cold, certain power. I placed my glass down. The faint click of crystal on wood silenced a few voices. Slowly I looked at Daniel, my lips curling into a smile he'd never seen before. "Daniel," I said softly, "do you want to see what a barista can do?" I pulled the phone from my clutch. My thumb pressed the screen. The 70-inch television flickered to life. The fireplace vanished, replaced by the stark logo of Channel 12 News. The sudden shift from soft holiday glow to a hard news display was enough to stop the laughter instantly. Daniel froze, the punchline of his own joke dying on his lips. My parents finally lifted their gaze from the turkey confusion clouding their faces. The silence was not peaceful. It was a vacuum waiting to be filled. I slipped the phone back into my clutch and leaned back in my chair, meeting Daniel's stunned gaze. "You'll find out soon enough," I said evenly. The silence remained unbroken except for the frantic ticking of the clock. They thought they had humiliated me. But tonight, I had only just laid the weapon on the table. They stared at me on the television, then back at me sitting in that dining room, and for a moment the house was silent. But I didn't feel victorious in that silence. What I felt was emptiness, the echo of 3 years living under a disguise they forced on me. 3 years as nothing more in their eyes than the girl behind the counter. At 25, that was the picture of me, dark green apron hands stained with espresso, standing behind a hulking stainless steel machine that hissed and spat steam. The air smelled of Colombian beans and scalded milk. "Still here, Avery?" a man asked one morning, smirking as he slid his credit card across the counter. He'd gone to high school with Daniel. "Thought you'd have found a real job by now after all that talk about business school." I smiled at my server's smile flat and rehearsed. "Still here, sir. Here's your latte." What I couldn't say to him or to anyone in my family was that the bar was my classroom. Each order, each foam heart I etched on a cappuccino was data. Every shift was research. I wasn't just a barista. I was an observer, a strategist. I watched how office workers wanted speed, how creatives lingered for hours needing community. While they thought I was wasting time, I was building knowledge no classroom had ever given me. Every holiday break I returned home, the favoritism cut deeper. Richard would beam at Daniel asking, "How's the stock market, son? Any new promotions?" Diane would nod, hanging on Daniel's every brag about finance. Then they would glance at me, voice dripping indifference. "So, still making coffee?" "Avery." Not a question. A sentence. A dismissal. They never admitted why I was still behind that counter. At 20, I had earned a partial scholarship to study business administration at Emory. But when I asked for help with living expenses, Richard shut me down. "Money goes to Daniel. He'll carry the family business one day. Not wasting resources on you. A daughter just needs to find a good husband." I fought back. Diane pulled me aside, her voice soft but laced with manipulation. "Sweetheart, you're clever, but don't wear yourself out chasing dreams. Focus on finding someone who can provide. Men build companies. Women support." That was their verdict. My path was barred not by lack of talent, but by being the youngest daughter in a toxic family. To me, it was betrayal. I left Emory. I didn't stop learning. For 5 years, I funneled every dollar in tips into online courses, business management, digital marketing, analytics. Late nights while Daniel slept on silk sheets, I studied search engine optimization. learning how SEO could drive customers into a business. I discovered cafes weren't just drinks, they were belonging rituals and community. That was the seed of the Phoenix Collective. Meanwhile, to save every dollar, I moved into the cafe basement, my world of concrete walls, a blow-up mattress, and a single bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. The hum of pipes became my lullaby, the hiss of the espresso machine my morning alarm. In those shadows, I learned that survival wasn't glamorous, it was relentless. When I finally pitched my idea, a community-driven chain that would let people own a part of their daily cup, my family's response was laughter. Going to sell shares with espresso shots. Daniel chuckled. No one's giving you stock or inheritance, Avery. You'll die as a waitress. Richard didn't even glance up. If you need money, ask Daniel for part-time work at the bank reception desk. Stop wasting my time. That night I cried harder than I had in years, and then I wiped my face and decided I would never ask them again. It was Judith, a loyal customer, who steadied me in those basement days. She came every morning for a black Americano. One dawn, as I wiped tears behind the counter, she said simply, "Girl, my folks laughed when I opened my dress shop. But every penny counts. Keep going. They'll choke on their own words." Her words planted resilience in me, roots I didn't know I had. And then came Alex Nguyen, the spark that turned resilience into fire. An old classmate, a programmer, who had left Silicon Valley to tinker with blockchain, found me one late night. "If banks won't back you, maybe code will," he said. "Let your customers be the investors. Forget the gatekeepers. Go DeFi, decentralized finance." The words cracked something open inside me. Instead of begging venture capitalists to believe I could let customers buy digital tokens, each one representing shares of loyalty and decision-making, it wasn't just coffee anymore, it was ownership. I sold my beat-up car, cashed out every saved tip, $80,000 in total, enough to rent a shoebox storefront. Alex coded the backbone connecting to common crypto wallets. Our system was raw, but it worked. The first Phoenix Collective Cafe opened not with champagne, but with risk and ridicule. My family never came to the opening. They didn't even acknowledge the invite. On opening day, I stood behind the counter trembling. Hours passed. Not a single customer. My chest tightened. Maybe I had gambled everything and lost. Then the bell jingled. A man walked in. He looked around the empty cafe, then at me. "You're the founder?" he asked. My voice cracked. "Yes." He raised his phone. The glow of the screen lit his face. "I saw this cafe on a DeFi forum. They're saying it could change the way community businesses work." My knees nearly buckled. He ordered a cappuccino, paid with his phone, and added, "If this works, you won't just be serving coffee. You'll be serving a revolution." I slid his cup across the counter, hands shaking. He took a sip, nodded once, and smiled. And for the first time, I believed it too. I remember that morning vividly. The air was brittle, the sidewalk dusted with leftover snowflakes from the night before. The street outside was empty, silent, as though holding its breath. Inside, Alex and I hadn't slept in nearly 24 hours. The smell of roasted beans clung to the walls, mixing with the sharp sting of fresh paint. Above the door, the wooden sign I'd carved by hand flickered weakly, "The Phoenix Collective." I chose the name because it meant rebirth. It was my own resurrection. I had arranged every chair, wiped every table, double-checked the register that Alex had wired into our rudimentary DeFi token wallet. The tension in the air was thicker than the espresso steaming on the counter. 2 hours ticked by. Not a single customer. Not one bell over the glass door. I stood behind the bar, fists pressed tight, trembling not from the cold but from fear. I had wagered everything. Just when despair crept in, the door jingled. A young man, maybe 22, lugging a backpack too big for his frame, stepped inside. His eyes scanned the space, not the menu. "Are you the founder?" he asked, voice curious, steady. I nodded, throat tight. "I saw your cafe on a crypto forum last night," he explained. "Community shares DeFi model. That's innovative. I want to buy a token." He hadn't come for coffee. He'd come for the idea. In that instant, I understood. I wasn't just serving lattes. I was serving ownership. He bought his token, and later that afternoon, two of his friends followed. They didn't just sip cappuccinos, they invested in a vision. Still, the first day's revenue barely covered a sliver of rent. Setbacks came quickly. An older man scowled when I explained tokens. I pay cash or I don't pay at all. Another day, our network glitched. A token transaction failed, the customer stormed out, leaving a 1-star Yelp review that pierced me like a blade. I locked myself in the restroom, tears slipping soundlessly down my face. But I wiped them away, steadying my hands. I had come too far to surrender. Meanwhile, family pressure mounted like a noose. Daniel had caught wind of the cafe and mocked me in the family group chat. Startup, more like broke tart. Hope you earn enough tips to buy a car that starts. My mother called her voice tight sharp beneath a veneer of care. Daniel works in banking Avery. And you're embarrassing us with this silly cafe. People will think we failed as parents. That was the Hayes way. They never saw ambition, only shame. But fate shifted one afternoon when a local blogger named Chloe Martin walked through the door. She was known in Atlanta's food and lifestyle scene. She ordered, she lingered, and then she asked, "Tell me about this DeFi system." I explained, nervous but passionate. A week later, her article went live. The Phoenix Collective isn't just a cafe. It's an experience, a community-owned company with shares in every cup. It spread. Tweets. Reddit threads, curious strangers driving miles to see for themselves. Traffic tripled in a week. Customers weren't just sipping coffee. They were joining a movement. For the first time, light pierced the shadows of my past humiliation. Revenge, I realized, could be served hot with a double shot of success. But cracks formed within. Alex grew restless. I noticed him one evening, eyes darting over an email. When he left his laptop open, I saw it, a major coffee chain offering to buy his DeFi code. The number was staggering, more money than he could ever see working beside me. He hadn't told me. Betrayal had planted its first seed right inside my own company. I clenched my jaw. If I wanted karma to work in my favor, I couldn't rely on luck or even allies. I needed to control the story. Every night after closing, I devoured guides on digital marketing. I taught myself SEO optimizing searches for phrases like DeFi Cafe, community shares, coffee, Atlanta startup cafe. I wanted the world to find me, not Daniel, not anyone else. One night, hunched over my laptop, an email slid into my inbox. My breath caught when I read the subject line, "We'd like to feature the Phoenix Collective in our Christmas Innovation Special." Channel 12 News. This was the moment. The chance I had waited 3 years for. The chance to let the world, and most of all my family, see the truth. My hands trembled as I hovered over the keyboard. My revenge would not be delivered in words shouted at a dinner table. It would come wrapped in the undeniable glow of a billion-dollar company. And for the first time, I knew the Phoenix was about to rise. The first month passed quickly and was riddled with difficulties. Everyone kept asking about the initial excitement, but the truth is, it had completely died down. Looking at the ledger on my laptop, it was clear rent payment was always just around the corner and utility costs were higher than revenue. We were steadily running out of capital. The pressure weighing on me every night became a difficult choice. How could I afford to pay Sarah, my only part-time barista, while still having enough power to keep the roaster going just to keep the business afloat? I had to swallow my tears. I chose the survival of the Phoenix Collective. That decision cost me the last bit of my pride. To stretch the dollars, I moved into the basement beneath the cafe. It was a damp hole with a concrete floor, barely enough room for a blow-up mattress. The air smelled of damp wool and scorched beans. Pipes groaned above me like restless ghosts, and sometimes rats scratched in the walls. The single bulb hummed like a trapped insect. I learned to sleep in 40-minute chunks and to wake with a shove of adrenaline when the espresso machine hissed awake upstairs. In those moments, I wasn't a founder. I was just a survivor. Of course, none of this was visible to my family. At one rare dinner at Aunt Eleanor's, Daniel bragged loud enough to drown out the clink of wine glasses. I pulled 20% gains on my stock portfolio last week, he said smug. That's what real investing looks like, making money while you sleep. My parents nodded like disciples. Then they turned to me. My mother's eyes carried that familiar mix of disappointment. Why don't you take advice from your brother Avery? Instead of wasting your time with foam and childish startup games. They didn't know I had traded sleep for spreadsheets, or that sleeping in the basement saved me $700 a month, money that meant payroll for Sarah. This wasn't blindness. It was a choice, a manipulation that kept me small beneath them. I poured nights into SEO, figuring out how to pull free traffic. I wrote blog posts optimizing searches for phrases like DeFi coffee investment startup shares. Slowly, traffic trickled in. A few crypto investors noticed, not because they cared about coffee, but because they loved the democratic ownership model. Still, I might not have lasted if not for Judith. She was 70, always in early for a black Americano. One morning I broke. Tears fell as I scrubbed the bar. She sat down, her voice steady. Girl, my family laughed when I opened my dress shop. But every penny counts. If you don't quit, they'll choke on their own words. Judith's words steadied me like a hand on my back. But hope was fragile, and betrayal was already growing in the shadows. Alex was restless. I caught glimpses of him closing his laptop too quickly, phone calls cut short. One night I saw the truth. Starbrew, a massive coffee chain, had offered him a fortune for his DeFi code. I swallowed the fear and hustled harder. I launched workshops teaching customers how to brew at home. If they bought tokens, they got permanent discounts and a vote in company decisions. The events went viral. The Phoenix Collective began to feel less like a storefront and more like an organism. One night after closing, my phone buzzed with a text. Daniel's name lit up the screen. Heard your cafe's tanking. Don't embarrass the family when it collapses. I gripped the phone until my knuckles went white. Rage, cold and steady, rose like smoke in my chest. I looked down at my stained apron, the Phoenix logo stitched across it. One day I promised myself. One day he'd choke on those words. He would see karma. He would witness revenge from the so-called worthless barista. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a freezing Saturday morning, and I was huddled in the basement of the Phoenix Collective when my phone lit up. A major Atlanta food blog had posted top 5 cafes that redefine community. The very first line made my heart pound so hard it shook my chest. The Phoenix Collective doesn't just sell coffee. It's a company where customers actually own shares in its future. DeFi just met for daily coffee. By the time I scrolled to the bottom, the post had already been shared hundreds of times. Within hours, it spread across Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit. People weren't just curious about coffee. They were fascinated by the story of a so-called worthless barista building a company through innovation, payback, and sheer will. The next day, I walked into the cafe to find a line snaking out the door and down the block. The smell of fresh ground beans mingled with the cold air every time the doorbell chimed. The grinder hummed, the espresso machine hissed, and the murmur of excited chatter filled the shop. Customers snapped photos of their drinks, proudly showing off their new DeFi tokens like badges of honor. For the first time, the register closed with enough cash not just to cover rent, electricity, and Sarah's wages, but to leave me with a surplus. I had done it. I was no longer just surviving. I was earning. Then came the call I never expected. An angel investor, barely 30, who had made a fortune in Bitcoin. He didn't demand a board seat or controlling shares. He wanted to buy $50,000 worth of tokens simply because he believed in the vision. That money became the seed that watered our expansion strategy. Alex sat across from me, his face pale but his mind sharp. We mapped out the plan, second location this time near a university campus. We're not just selling coffee anymore, Alex, I told him. My voice shook with excitement. We're selling a model, a company where customers inherit success. But when I shared the news with my family over dinner, their reaction was venom dressed as concern. I just signed a lease for a second cafe, I said, smiling. Daniel barked a laugh. Anyone can open a second shop. That doesn't make it a real company. Real companies trade stock, Avery. Real companies build shareholder value. You're playing with toys while I deal in billions. Mother's voice followed swiftly polished with cold elegance. Daniel is right, dear. Banking is a career. Coffee is a hobby. Please don't embarrass yourself by calling it more than that. Their betrayal was sharper than silence. It was a deliberate refusal to see me. I wasn't just building a business. I was rewriting the rules of ownership. But in their eyes, I was still the family's humiliation. Meanwhile, Alex grew more restless. He slipped outside to take calls, came back with guilt shadowing his eyes. What I didn't know then was that Starbrew, a corporate coffee giant, had dangled a golden rope, a CTO title, stock options worth millions. All they wanted was his DeFi code, our code. He hadn't betrayed me yet, but the secret already lived between us like a ticking clock. To drown the unease, I poured myself into community building. Friday nights became Aurora nights. Local musicians played under soft lights and customers had to buy tokens for entry. Videos of the events spread across TikTok, buzzing with laughter, clinking cups, and the Phoenix logo glowing like fire in the dark. The cafe stopped being just a place to drink coffee. It became a movement. 6 months later, I cut the ribbon at our second location near Northwestern University. Students lined up, thrilled by the chance to sip lattes while investing in something they felt was theirs. The local press published a headline that nearly made me cry: DeFi meets daily coffee. A startup redefines student culture. That night, exhausted but proud, I collapsed into my rented apartment a step up from the cafe basement. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Funny, you're still playing house with little coffee shops while I'm invited to shareholder meetings. You'll never be anything more than a barista. I stared at the words, breath-shallow nails digging crescents into my palms. It wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war. Daniel, I whispered into the quiet, one day those words will play back on the very screens you worship, and you'll wish you had stayed silent. The third Phoenix Collective Cafe opened in a frenzy of light and applause. We had built something from nothing, and for a moment it felt unstoppable. Students camped outside our new downtown store for opening night, clutching their tokens like tickets to a revolution. The local press compared us to early-day Starbucks. But success carried its own poison. Pressure crept in slow at first, then suffocating. Every day the line stretched out the door, and every night I collapsed in the office upstairs, forehead pressed to spreadsheets glowing with impossible demands. Rent, payroll, beans, repairs. The numbers weren't bleeding, but they weren't forgiving either. Expansion meant survival, but it also meant risk. Inside the cafe, we were running on fumes. Sarah pulled double shifts. Machines broke under the strain of endless orders. I worked 18-hour days cleaning toilets at midnight, writing blog posts at 2 a.m., answering investor emails before dawn. The coffee smelled like triumph in the front of the house, but behind the counter exhaustion reigned, and Alex had begun to change. At first I told myself it was just fatigue. He avoided eye contact, skipped strategy sessions, and scrolled endlessly on his phone between shifts. But then came the secrecy. Late-night calls in hushed tones, laptop lids slammed shut the moment I walked in. I didn't press him, not yet. Betrayal was a ghost I felt but could not name. Meanwhile, my family circled like vultures waiting for a crack. Daniel sent me a message after our third store launch: growth without real stock is a fantasy. Investors will flee. You should quit while you're behind. When I ignored him, he doubled down at the next family dinner. 3 coffee shops isn't a company, he announced, swirling his wine. It's a hobby. Until you trade stock, you're not building wealth. You're just entertaining broke dreamers. My parents nodded, their silence heavy with approval. Their contempt had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened with every cafe I opened. I sat there in silence, but inside my fury burned bright. They didn't see the crowds outside my windows. They didn't hear the laughter during Aurora nights. They didn't feel the spark of community I had ignited. To them, I was still a barista playing make-believe. But they weren't the only ones who doubted. Investors began to circle with questions I wasn't sure I could answer. How would you defend against corporate competition? How would you scale? What if another company copied you? Their words drilled into my skull long after the meetings ended. I told them I had a plan. But in truth, I only had grit. Judith was the only voice that cut through the noise. One morning she lingered at her usual window seat, sipping her Americano as the sun poured through glass. "You look tired, girl," she said. "Don't let them trick you into thinking exhaustion is failure. Sometimes it's just the price of planting seeds." I smiled, though my chest ached with fear. Seeds or not. I could feel something shifting beneath my feet. The ground was restless. The success we had built felt too fragile, too easy to fracture. At night, when the cafe emptied and the city quieted, I'd walk past glowing billboards advertising other coffee brands, their slogans screaming promises of community and innovation. They weren't saying my name yet, but I felt their shadow on the horizon. And in the dim office light, I caught Alex staring at an email on his screen, face pale, jaw tight. When I entered, he snapped the laptop shut. "Just work," he said quickly. "Nothing important." But I knew better. Pressure was breaking him. Pressure was breaking us. And deep down I sensed it. Betrayal wasn't coming from across the street. It was already sitting inside my own walls. The Phoenix Collective was soaring. Our third cafe had just opened in downtown Atlanta, right where the rent could kill you, but the visibility could make you. Revenue had quadrupled in 6 months. Customers lined up for our Aurora Night students, waved their tokens like backstage passes, and articles called me the barista who built a billion-dollar vision. For the first time, I allowed myself to exhale. But success is a fragile glass, and the first hairline cracks had already begun to form. It happened late one evening when I borrowed Alex's laptop to print an invoice. An email window glowed on the screen, unsent but damning. "Her startup is small. She won't survive long. Better sell before the stock dies." The words cut deeper than any of Daniel's taunts. My chest tightened. Betrayal wasn't from an enemy this time. It was inside my own walls. I closed the laptop without a sound, face steady, though my blood roared. Alex had once told me we were building a revolution. Now he was writing me off as a lost cause. I didn't confront him, not yet. I wanted proof and timing. Meanwhile, the city outside buzzed with a different storm. Starbrew had begun to rise like a shadow over my cafes. Glossy billboards flashed on highways, community coffee reinvented. Their flagship downtown location was just 3 blocks from ours. Every morning I watched crowds circle their polished doors, drawn by their spectacle and scale. The media began to blur the lines. Articles praised Starbrew's pioneering use of tokenized shares, an idea born in my basement, now dressed in corporate sheen. Some outlets didn't even mention the Phoenix Collective at all. It felt like erasure. It felt like theft. Inside, the pressure bled into everything. Customers whispered about whether Phoenix could compete. A barista quit, saying Starbrew's benefits were better. Investors sent probing emails. "What's your long-term defense strategy?" Every question was a knife against my ribs. And Alex grew colder with each passing week. He spent more time on his phone than behind the bar. His words, once bubbling with ideas, now circled one theme: safety. "Starbrew has resources we don't. They could guarantee us security, Avery." He didn't even hide the name anymore. Daniel, of course, sniffed weakness like a wolf. A text came one night. "Even your partner thinks you're worthless. Why not quit before the world finds out?" My parents followed with their chorus of manipulation. "Daniel is right," Richard told me. "He's the smart one. Don't let your pride ruin everything." I heard their voices layered on top of Alex's silence. And for a moment, I wondered if they were all right, if I was the one building on sand. The confrontation came at midnight in the closed cafe. The lights were dim shadows stretched across the polished counters. Alex stood by the register, scrolling his phone. "Tell me the truth," I said. My voice was steady, stripped of all warmth. "Have you been negotiating with Starbrew?" He looked at the floor. Silence was his answer. "This is just business," he muttered finally. "They can give us stock, real security. I'm tired of fighting." The word security fell like poison. I straightened cold steel filling my chest. If you want safety, then take it. The Phoenix Collective doesn't need traitors. Right there, I pulled out my phone, revoked his access to every account, changed the master passwords, and sent a termination email. Each click of the keys was a blade dropping. He left without another word, the bell above the door jangling like the last nail in a coffin. Alone in the cafe, I felt hollow and fierce all at once. Outside Starbrew's neon sign blazed across the night, a rival and a warning. Inside, betrayal still stung, but Judith's words came back like armor. Losing a partner is painful. Better that than losing yourself. Betrayal clears the way for justice. Starbrew was gaining ground. Alex had chosen his side. My family was circling, waiting for me to collapse. But as I stood in the empty cafe, the hum of the espresso machine in the background, I whispered to myself, they can steal the system. They can copy the model. But they will never steal me. I knew Starbrew would strike, but watching it unfold was a gut punch I couldn't brace for. They launched their flagship downtown Atlanta, just a few blocks from my third Phoenix Collective Cafe. Their sign blazed across the skyline with the slogan, Community Coffee 2.0. They boasted of a shiny new model where customers could buy tokens, earn shares, and step into the DeFi coffee experience. I stood across the street that morning, snow melting into slush beneath my boots, and watched a line 5 times longer than mine wrap around their block. My stomach twisted. They hadn't just copied me. They had stolen the soul of my vision, polished it with corporate gloss, and weaponized their wealth to crush me. The media devoured it. Headlines shouted, Starbrew brings DeFi to coffee. Commentators hailed them as innovators. Some articles erased me entirely, painting them as pioneers. Reading those words felt like being erased from history. It wasn't just business. It was humiliation carved into the public record. And of course, Daniel seized the moment. At dinner, he clicked the TV remote, grinning as Starbrew's CEO appeared on screen. "See, Avery," he taunted. "That's a real company. Money, scale, strategy, not your barista hobby." Mother chimed in, calling me stubborn, naive, a girl playing pretend while the men handled real finance. Their glee in my supposed downfall cut deeper than any rival's theft. This wasn't family. This was toxic delight in my pain. And then came Aurora's struggle. Customers drifted to Starbrew, seduced by the spectacle. Revenue plunged. For 4 nights, I stared at blood-red numbers on my reports, heart pounding. One of my baristas quit, saying I need stability. "Starbrew pays better." His words stung like betrayal, small but sharp. Then came the blow of corporate manipulation. An email from Starbrew's lawyers landed in my inbox, trademark infringement. "Your DeFi coffee model violates our intellectual property." They had stolen my idea, and now they were accusing me of theft. I laughed bitterly, alone in the dark. This wasn't a coffee war. This was injustice versus karma. If I went into a courtroom, they'd crush me with legal fees. They had money. I had only truth and community. That would be my weapon. I rallied my early investors, the ones who had bought tokens when no one believed. We held an Aurora community assembly in the downtown cafe. I gave them the mic. "This isn't just her cafe," one young man said, voice fierce, captured on a phone camera. "It's our cafe. We hold shares. Starbrew can't buy authenticity." The video went viral overnight. Hashtags bloomed, #real DeFi coffee. Our cafe. Public sentiment began to shift. Starbrew had size, but we had soul. Still, I needed more than emotion. I needed a strategy. I turned to the silent skill I had sharpened in those sleepless nights, SEO. While Starbrew burned millions on flashy ads, I optimized every keyword, every blog post. Aurora Beans, cafe founder. Authentic DeFi coffee. Community shares cafe. Soon, when customers searched, they found me before they found them. Quietly and visibly, David's stone struck Goliath's forehead. Slowly, Phoenix customers returned. We weren't just surviving, we were reclaiming. And then late one night, as I scanned analytics, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, from out of state. Hello, this is NBC News, a woman's voice said crisply. We're producing our annual Christmas business special, highlighting innovation in America. Your story, DeFi and coffee community and entrepreneurship, it's exactly what we want. Would you fly to New York for a live segment? My hand trembled as I lowered the phone. Tears burned hot and unbidden, but not from defeat. They were tears of release of vindication. The chance had arrived. My revenge would not come in shadows or whispered victories. It would come on live national television. Christmas was here. Karma was ready. The official email trembled in my hand, not because I was afraid, but because of the weight it carried. Confirmed, you will be featured on National Business Spotlight, Christmas edition. Those words were the culmination of every sleepless night, every humiliation, every betrayal. I stood alone in my cafe, the same one where I had once curled up on the floor, just to save rent, and realized this was destiny. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I practiced in front of the mirror, reciting my story until my voice no longer shook. I crafted every word carefully. How a so-called worthless barista had chosen DeFi and community shares to build a billion-dollar company. I trained my eyes to lock on the camera without flinching. This wasn't just an interview. This was my trial, my verdict, my final battle. Whenever fatigue pressed down, Judith's words returned. When you speak, don't just represent yourself. Represent everyone who's been silenced. I wasn't only speaking for Avery Hayes. I was speaking for every woman dismissed by a toxic family, for every dream crushed because it didn't come wrapped in stock inheritance or Wall Street approval. Meanwhile, the Hayes family remained blind in their favoritism. In the group chat, Daniel bragged endlessly, closed another deal for wealthy stockholders today. That's real business. Firework emojis from my parents followed. I stayed silent, holding my secret close like the sharpest blade. Then Alex reappeared. He showed up at the cafe one gray afternoon, gaunt and broken. Avery, Starbrew cut me out, he admitted. They used my code, then dumped me. Said I wasn't corporate enough. For a heartbeat, an old memory flickered. Alex hunched over his laptop in my apartment, coding the backbone that brought the Phoenix Collective to life. Back then, his excitement had lit up the room brighter than any neon sign. For one fragile second, I almost saw that version of him again. But then I remembered the secrecy, the lies, the deal he had nearly made behind my back. He lifted his eyes, pleading, "Let's rebuild. We can fix this. Together." I shook my head slowly. You didn't just betray me, Alex. You betrayed every person who believed in us. You sold out justice for stock. I turned away, my voice steady. I don't need you anymore. His footsteps retreated and the bell over the door gave a final hollow jangle. The night before the interview, I sat alone in the downtown cafe pen, scratching across paper as I wrote my story one last time. In my closet hung a crisp navy suit, a quiet declaration of power. I thought of my 10-year-old self clutching a math trophy that no one celebrated, of Daniel's smirk, of Richard's silence, of Diane's cold dismissals. Every wound had become fuel. I whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow I won't just defend myself. I'll show the world who I am. Revenge isn't ugly. It's the truth." The next morning I walked into NBC's studio in New York. The lights dazzled, the cameras loomed. Sarah Miller, the host, greeted me warmly. "This Christmas," she said to the camera, "we're highlighting entrepreneurs who turned injustice into innovation." She turned to me. "Why the Phoenix Collective? Avery, why DeFi? What drove you?" The studio hushed. I looked straight into the camera lens and let every scar speak. I was raised in a family that worshipped stocks and inheritance. They told me I'd always be a worthless barista. But injustice isn't rare. It's the rule. So I built a company where no one is excluded, where every customer holds shares, where every voice counts. With DeFi, they don't just buy coffee. They buy into a vision. I spoke of sleepless nights in the basement, of betrayal, of toxic favoritism, of how I had fought corporate giants with nothing but truth and SEO. The audience broke into applause, loud and heartfelt. Sarah smiled and turned back to the camera. "Thank you, Avery Hayes. Ladies and gentlemen, don't look away. This cafe founder might just be the face of the future. As the camera zoomed in on me, I pictured the Hayes family's living room, the Christmas tree glowing, the wine glasses full, Daniel smirking until the screen showed me instead. Until the anchor declared me not a failure but a founder. In that moment, revenge was no longer a whisper. It was broadcast live, undeniable. And soon that broadcast would reach the only audience I had been waiting for all along, my family. The Hayes family sat around the lavish dining table, the scent of roasted turkey and rich red wine filling the room. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, silver cutlery glinted against porcelain plates. It was Christmas Eve, and family drama was simmering beneath every polite smile. Daniel raised his glass, voice booming with arrogance. "They're considering me for a partner at the firm. Real money, real shares, real stock. That's the kind of business that matters." Uncle Gary chuckled, clapping him on the back. Aunt Eleanor beamed with admiration. Richard and Diane leaned forward, pride radiating from their faces. The inheritance, the future of the Hayes family, it all belonged to their golden son. I sat quietly, fingertips brushing the phone in my lap, already set on its timer. My heart beat steady. Tonight was not about patience. Tonight was about reckoning. Daniel turned to me, smirking, curling like poison. "Still serving lattes, Avery. Still playing barista, while the rest of us build real wealth. You'll always be a worthless barista. One day maybe you'll finally realize you should have listened to me." Laughter rippled around the table. I lifted my head, smiled, not with bitterness, but with the cold certainty of karma. "Actually, Daniel," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "The segment I mentioned earlier, I think it's about to start." I lifted my hand. The phone connected wirelessly. The television in the living room, which had been blank since I tested it hours ago, burst to life. Sarah Miller, the familiar face of national business spotlight, filled the screen. Her voice was sharp, confident. "Tonight we spotlight Avery Hayes, the cafe founder turning cappuccinos into capital." The room stilled. The camera cut to sweeping shots of the Phoenix Collective. Lines of customers outside the downtown store. College students holding tokens aloft like tickets to a revolution. The caption blazed across the bottom of the screen, "Billion-dollar startup." Daniel's grin vanished. His hand slackened. The stem of his wineglass snapped, crystal shattering against the Persian rug, red liquid spreading like blood. The sound rang out in the silence like a bell of defeat. My parents froze, eyes wide, faces pale as linen. Sarah's voice carried through the silence. The Phoenix Collective, now valued at over $1 billion, built on projected stock and tokenized shares. A community-owned company challenging traditional finance. Then my face filled the screen. My eyes were steady. My voice was strong. I was called a worthless barista, I declared, words echoing in the hushed room. But every cup became an investment. Every customer is a shareholder. The Phoenix Collective is a company built not on inheritance, but on respect. The silence was deafening. Every hum of the chandelier, every tick of the grandfather clock became thunder. Daniel stammered, voice cracking. This can't be real." I turned to him, gaze sharp enough to cut through every year of mockery. "It's real, Daniel. That's my company. And this is the respect you swore I'd never earn." Richard cleared his throat, scrambling for ground. "Why didn't you tell us, Avery? Why hide something like this?" I met his eyes steady. "Would you have listened? You only ever had ears for Daniel's stock reports. You never wanted my vision. That favoritism forced me to build karma on my own." The broadcast continued, rolling footage of bustling cafes, investors, praising the model community members, speaking with pride. Then the viral clip played me standing before a crowd saying karma has its own timing. The words landed like a verdict. Daniel clutched his head, sweat beading on his temple. His humiliation had finally replaced mine. Every cruel toast, every manipulation had circled back. The segment ended with me walking out of the NBC studio cameras, flashing my name on the chyron beneath Avery Hayes, cafe founder, billion-dollar visionary. In the dining room, Daniel whispered, broken and trembling, "She's not just a barista." I stood the legs of my chair scraping against the polished hardwood. Straightening my shoulders, I looked at each of them in turn, Daniel pale and shaking, Richard angry but powerless, Diane her lips quivering with the taste of defeat. "No," I said clearly, voice ringing like a bell. "I'm the founder." And then I walked away from the table, leaving their silence behind me. The broadcast ended, but the silence in the Hayes dining room lingered long after the credits rolled. Daniel sat slumped shards of glass at his feet, staring at the television as though it had delivered a death sentence. My parents were frozen statues trapped in the wreckage of their own favoritism. I walked out of the house that night with my coat pulled tight against the freezing air, each breath visible in the cold. Behind me I could still hear Diane calling weakly, "Avery, wait, please come back. We can talk." But I didn't turn around. For 31 years I had been begging them to listen. Tonight they had no choice but to hear me. The days after the broadcast changed everything. On Christmas morning, my phone erupted with messages. Journalists, investors, old classmates, all of them flooding my inbox. Headlines filled every newsfeed. From worthless barista to billion-dollar cafe founder, Phoenix Collective takes on Starbrew and wins. Customers poured into my cafes. The lines stretched around the block. People wanted not only the coffee but the story. They wanted to taste resilience. They wanted to buy tokens to hold shares in something that felt alive and real. And for the first time, Daniel was invisible. At the bank where he worked, whispers followed him in the hallways. Colleagues who once admired him now compared him unfavorably to me. His sister built a billion-dollar company, one coworker was overheard saying. What has he ever built? The humiliation that he had handed me for years had returned to him multiplied. Richard and Diane tried to rewrite the narrative almost immediately. Diane called me first. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with honey I had never tasted before. "We're so proud of you. We always knew you had it in you. We just wanted you to be safe." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "No, you didn't. You wanted me quiet. You wanted me dependent. You didn't believe in me until the cameras forced you to." There was a long silence before she whispered, "Families forgive." "Families don't betray," I answered, and I hung up. 2 days later, Richard invited me to lunch at the country club he once bragged about to his colleagues. I arrived out of curiosity, not loyalty. He tried to charm me with small talk, ordering a bottle of wine that cost more than my first espresso machine. Then he leaned in, his voice low. "Avery, you've done something remarkable, but to scale you'll need discipline management. Daniel could step in. We could make this a true family business." I looked him dead in the eye. "You had 30 years to treat me like family. You don't get to take my company now that the cameras are watching. This isn't your inheritance to control. It's my justice." His face hardened. "You'll regret turning your back on blood." I stood, leaving the untouched glass of wine on the table. "No, I regret waiting this long to realize my worth." Meanwhile, Daniel spiraled. Friends stopped answering his calls. The promotion he bragged about was quietly rescinded after clients complained about his arrogance. One night he showed up at my downtown cafe. He looked nothing like the brother I had grown up with, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot, desperation carved into every line of his face. "Avery," he begged, voice cracking. "Please help me. Give me a role at Phoenix. I'll do anything. I can't be a failure." For a moment I almost felt pity. But then I remembered every Christmas toast, every cruel word, every time he laughed while our parents stayed silent. "You said I'd always be worthless," I replied softly. "Now you know how it feels." He reached for my hand across the counter, but I pulled it away. "This company was built on respect. You don't belong here." He left without another word, the bell above the door jingling like a final judgment. The following week, I was invited to speak at a business conference in Chicago. On stage under the bright lights, I told the audience, "Respect is not inherited. It's built." For years, I was told that my place was behind a counter serving coffee. But I learned that every so-called worthless act can be the foundation of something powerful. The Phoenix Collective was born from humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. But it became my revenge. Not against people, but against the lies they told me about my worth. The applause was thunderous. Back in Atlanta, word spread that Diane had stopped showing her face at charity luncheons. Richard's golf buddies teased him about being the father of the Barista billionaire. Daniel avoided holiday gatherings altogether. And me, I wasn't celebrating their downfall. I was celebrating my freedom. That night, as I closed up my newest cafe, Judith sat by the window sipping her Americano as always. She looked at me with a proud smile. "You see, Avery?" she said, her voice soft but steady. "They tried to bury you, but they didn't know you were a seed." I felt tears sting my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were the release of years of silence breaking open into triumph. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I didn't need it. My life was no longer defined by their favoritism or their betrayal. The Hayes family was facing their truth, and I was finally living mine. Snow blanketed Atlanta the morning after Christmas, soft and clean, as though the world itself had chosen to start fresh. I stood inside the largest Phoenix Collective location, our new flagship cafe with tall glass windows, and the smell of roasted beans weaving through the air, and watched the line of customers curl around the block. Their scarves and coats made them look like a parade of believers, each one here, not just for coffee, but for a piece of something bigger. This was no longer about cappuccinos and foam art. This was about community, about reclaiming dignity, about rewriting the rules of inheritance and success. For years, I had been the silent daughter at the family table, invisible behind Daniel's bragging and my parents' favoritism. But now, strangers across the country spoke my name with respect. They didn't see a worthless barista. They saw a founder, a leader, a woman who had taken humiliation and forged it into power. Investors flooded in. Shares of Phoenix Collective traded in secondary markets at values I had never imagined. Our DeFi tokens became case studies in business schools. Even the word barista began to take on a new meaning in the media, no longer a symbol of failure, but of resilience. But more important than the money, more important than the billion-dollar valuation, was the quiet victory I carried inside. The laughter that once broke me no longer mattered. Daniel's taunts no longer lived in my chest. My parents' silence no longer echoed in my ears. I had proven first to myself, then to the world, that respect cannot be inherited like a stock portfolio. It must be earned sip by sip, choice by choice. Daniel disappeared from the family spotlight. He declined invitations, skipped gatherings, and in time became a cautionary tale whispered about at country clubs, the banker who mocked his sister and lost everything to karma. My parents tried to rebuild a bridge, but I didn't need it anymore. I had built my own foundation. One evening as I was closing the cafe, Judith sat at her usual table by the window, her Americano cooling in her hands. She watched me wipe the counter, then said quietly, "You know, Avery, you've done more than build a business. You've built proof. Proof that betrayal doesn't define us, favoritism doesn't break us, and injustice doesn't last forever." Her words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I smiled, truly smiled. For the first time in years. Christmas had once been a season of humiliation for me. Now it was a season of rebirth. The phoenix had risen, and to those who doubted, mocked, or betrayed me, my revenge was not in their ruin. It was on my rise. So if you're listening to this story, ask yourself, where have you been silenced? Where have you been dismissed? What truth are you holding back because someone told you that you weren't enough? Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for inheritance. Don't wait for respect to be handed down like a gift. Build it. Earn it. Rise. Because one day, just like me, you may find yourself at the table again. And when they call you worthless, you'll smile, press play, and let the truth speak louder than their laughter. If you felt this story in your heart, if you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or told you were worthless, leave me a comment. Share your own story and subscribe for more. Because every voice deserves to rise, and
The master bedroom needs to be cleared by tonight, my mother-in-law Barbara announced, marching into my house with moving boxes. Amanda needs her space properly set up. She gestured to the young woman trailing behind her, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I stood in my kitchen, coffee mug gripped tightly in my hand, watching this surreal scene unfold. Amanda, my husband's girlfriend of 6 months, shifted nervously from foot to foot, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Barbara waved dismissively toward the back of the house. "The garage has that small room attached. That should be fine for now, until you figure out your next steps." My name is Olivia, and at 34, I was watching my mother-in-law try to install my husband's girlfriend in my own home. The same home I'd spent the last 8 years turning into a sanctuary. The same home that now felt like it was being invaded. "This is my house," I said firmly, setting down my coffee before I gave in to the urge to throw it. Barbara's laugh was sharp and cruel. "This house belongs to the family. Michael needs it now for his new life. You should be grateful we're letting you stay at all." Michael, my husband of 10 years, had moved out 3 months ago, claiming he needed space to find himself. Apparently, he'd found himself in the arms of his 25-year-old yoga instructor. I'd known about Amanda for weeks, but them trying to move her into my home, was a new level of audacity. "I'm not moving to the garage," I stated, crossing my arms. "And Amanda isn't moving in here. Don't be difficult, Olivia." Barbara stepped closer, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my face. "This house has been in our family for generations. Michael's grandfather built it. You're just the soon-to-be ex-wife. You have no right to it." What Barbara didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Michael's grandfather Thomas had been more than just the man who built this house. He'd been my mentor, my friend, and in many ways, more of a parent to me than Barbara had ever been to Michael. I'd spent countless evenings with Thomas in his final years, listening to his stories, learning about the family history, and helping him organize his affairs. Barbara had been too busy with her social clubs to visit him, and Michael had always found excuses not to stop by. But I was there, 3 times a week, until the very end. "The movers will be here this afternoon," Barbara continued, already measuring the windows for new curtains. "Amanda has excellent taste. This place could use a more youthful touch." I watched as Amanda ran her hand along the kitchen counter, the same counter where Thomas had taught me to make his secret recipe pasta sauce. Every surface in this house held memories, not just of my marriage, but of the real family I found here. "I have some work calls to make," I said calmly, picking up my coffee again. "I'll be in my office." "Your office?" Barbara scoffed. "That's going to be Amanda's yoga room. She'll need somewhere to train her clients." I closed my door on Barbara's continued demands and pulled out my phone. With trembling fingers, I dialed a number I'd memorized months ago. "Mr. Patterson? It's Olivia. I think it's time." The lawyer's voice was calm and reassuring. "I was wondering when you'd call. Shall I proceed with opening the trust documents?" "Yes," I replied, hearing Barbara and Amanda's voices float up from downstairs as they discussed paint colors. "It's definitely time." What they didn't know was that Thomas, in his final months, had done more than just share stories with me. He'd seen exactly who his family had become. Barbara's materialistic manipulation, Michael's weak-willed selfishness, and he planned accordingly. I hung up with Mr. Patterson and opened my desk drawer, pulling out an old envelope. Inside was a letter Thomas had given me 2 weeks before he passed away. "Only open this when you need it most," he'd said, his wise eyes twinkling with that familiar mix of mischief and kindness. I'd known this day was coming. I'd seen the signs in Michael's growing distance, in Barbara's increasingly hostile behavior. Thomas had seen it too, long before any of us were ready to admit it. Downstairs, I heard the front door open and Michael's voice join the others. "The movers are on their way," he called out. "Mom, did you tell Olivia about the garage?" I ran my fingers over Thomas's letter, remembering his last words to me. "Sometimes, my dear, justice comes in unexpected ways. Just be patient and trust in what we've planned." The sound of footsteps on the stairs told me they were coming to confront me again. I tucked the letter away and squared my shoulders. Let them come. Let them make their plans and measure their curtains. The trust documents would be unsealed tomorrow morning, and then they'd learn what Thomas had known all along. That family isn't about blood or marriage. It's about who shows up, who cares, who stays. Barbara's sharp knock rattled my office door. "Olivia, the movers need to get in there." I smile, thinking of Thomas and the future he'd helped secure. Come in, Barbara. We need to talk about the house. The door swung open, and there they stood. Barbara, Michael, and Amanda, ready to claim what they thought was rightfully theirs. They had no idea what was coming. What's there to talk about? Michael asked, leaning against my office doorframe with that familiar look of smug confidence. Mom's right. This is a family house. You're not family anymore. I sat calmly at my desk, fingers tracing the edge of Thomas's letter. Actually, there's quite a lot to discuss. Mr. Patterson, the family lawyer, will be here in 20 minutes. Barbara's perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. Patterson? Why would that old fool be coming here? Because I called him, I replied simply, and he's bringing some important documents that all of you need to see. Michael straightened up, his smugness wavering slightly. He remembered Mr. Patterson from his grandfather's funeral, the stern-faced lawyer who'd given him a disapproving look when he checked his phone during the eulogy. Whatever game you're playing, Olivia, Barbara started, but the doorbell cut her off. That'll be him now, I said, standing up. Shall we move this to the living room? They followed me downstairs, Barbara whispering furiously to Michael while Amanda trailed behind, clutching her designer bag like a security blanket. Mr. Patterson stood at the door, his weathered briefcase in hand, looking exactly as he had the day Thomas had introduced us. Mrs. Collins, he nodded to me, then turned a cool gaze to the others. Barbara, Michael. And this must be the girlfriend. Amanda flushed red as Barbara bristled. Now see here, Patterson. Please, he interrupted. Let's all sit down. We have important matters to discuss. Once everyone was seated, Barbara perched on the edge of the sofa like she was ready to pounce. Michael slouched in his father's old armchair, Amanda hovering uncertainly nearby. Mr. Patterson opened his briefcase. Before his death, the lawyer began, Thomas Collins made certain arrangements regarding this property, arrangements he specifically asked me not to reveal until they became necessary. What arrangements? Michael demanded. Grandpa left everything to the family. Mr. Patterson pulled out a thick envelope. Actually, Michael, your grandfather left this house in a very specific trust. A trust that named one particular person as its executor and primary beneficiary. Barbara's face went pale. That's impossible. This house has always passed through the male line. It belongs to Michael. Not according to this, Mr. Patterson said, removing several documents from the envelope. Thomas was quite clear about his wishes. The house and everything in it was to be placed in trust for the person who, in his words, showed true understanding of what family means. He turned to me, extending the papers. Olivia has the name trustee and beneficiary. These belong to you. The silence in the room was deafening. I took the documents, remembering all those evenings with Thomas, how he'd watched me care for his home, tend his garden, listen to his stories while his own family was too busy to visit. This is ridiculous. Barbara exploded, jumping to her feet. She manipulated him. She took advantage of a sick old man. Mr. Patterson's voice cut through her accusations like steel. Thomas was of completely sound mind when he made these arrangements. In fact, he specifically anticipated this reaction. He pulled out another paper. He left a letter explaining his decision. Shall I read it? Michael was staring at me, his face a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. He remembered all the times I'd invited him to visit his grandfather, all the dinners he'd skipped, all the family stories he'd been too busy to hear. To my family, Mr. Patterson read, if you're hearing this letter being read, it means you've forgotten what truly matters. This house was built not just with bricks and mortar, but with love, with the hope of creating a place where family would grow and thrive. Olivia understood this. While you were all busy with your own lives, she sat with me, learned our history, and showed me what it means to be truly family. The house is hers to use as she sees fit. Perhaps this will teach you that family is earned, not simply claimed by blood or marriage. Barbara sank back onto the sofa, her face ashen. Michael stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair in that nervous gesture I knew so well. The movers, Amanda said suddenly, her voice small. They're supposed to be coming. You should probably cancel them, I suggested quietly, since you won't be moving in after all. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. There's more. The trust also stipulates that any attempt to contest these arrangements will result in the house being donated to the Historical Society. Thomas was quite thorough in ensuring his wishes would be respected. Barbara's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Michael looked lost, like a child who'd just been told Santa wasn't real. Amanda had already grabbed her phone, presumably to cancel the movers. Now, I said, standing up, I think it's time for everyone to leave. I have some redecorating to do. I looked directly at Barbara, and I won't be needing that garage room after all. The days following Mr. Patterson's revelation brought a parade of reactions from the family. Barbara launched into damage control mode, calling relatives to spin her version of events before word got out that she tried to move her son's girlfriend into my house. Michael oscillated between angry texts and pathetic attempts at reconciliation. We could still work this out, he wrote one evening. The house is big enough for both of us. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I spent my time restoring the house to the way Thomas had loved it. I rehung his old photographs that Barbara had deemed outdated. I brought his favorite armchair back from the attic where Michael had banished it. Each change felt like reclaiming not just my space, but Thomas's legacy. A week after the trust revelation, I was tending Thomas's rose garden when a car pulled into the driveway. It was Amanda, looking considerably less confident than the day she'd walked in planning to take my bedroom. "Can we talk?" she asked, hovering by the garden gate. I gestured to the patio chairs. 5 minutes. She sat, fidgeting with her bracelet. "I didn't know," she burst out. "About the house, about Thomas, about any of it. Michael told me you were just his bitter ex who wouldn't let go. And you believed him," I said, not unkindly. "Just like you believed Barbara when she said you could move in here." Amanda looked down. "I'm starting to see why Thomas chose you. Michael. He's not who I thought he was. Last night he suggested we try to contest the trust anyway, said we could figure out a way around it. I couldn't help but laugh. That sounds like Michael, always looking for the easy way out. I ended it, she said quietly. This whole thing opened my eyes. I don't want to be part of a family that treats people this way. As she left, I thought about Thomas and how he would have appreciated the irony. His final gift hadn't just secured my future, it had revealed the true character of everyone involved. The following Sunday, I hosted my first dinner party in the house since everything happened. I invited Mr. Patterson and his wife, along with a few close friends who'd supported me through the divorce. As we sat around Thomas' old dining table, sharing stories and laughter, I felt his presence in every corner of the house. Barbara made one final attempt at confrontation, showing up unannounced one morning with a manila envelope. "These are photos," she announced, dumping them on my kitchen counter. "Proof that you manipulated Thomas. I'm taking them to my lawyer." I calmly slid them back toward her. "Go ahead. And while you're there, ask your lawyer about the consequences of contesting the trusts. I'm sure the Historical Society would love to give tours of this place." She left, but not before I saw the defeat in her eyes. She knew she'd lost, not just the house, but the power she'd wielded over the family for so long. Michael moved to a different city shortly after. I heard through mutual friends that he was telling people he'd left the house to me out of kindness, rewriting history to protect his ego. That was fine by me. I had the truth, and more importantly, I had Thomas's legacy. 1 year after the failed attempt to move Amanda in, I sat in Thomas's study, surrounded by his books and mementos. The house felt more like home than ever, filled with the warmth and history he'd always cherished. I opened his letter again, the one he'd given me before he died, and read the last lines that had given me strength through everything. "My dear Olivia, a house is more than walls and a roof. It's a vessel for love, for memories, for the kind of family we choose rather than the one we're born into. You understood that when the others couldn't. Take care of our home, and let it take care of you. With all my love, Thomas." I folded the letter carefully and looked around the study, at the life Thomas had built and entrusted to me. Barbara and Michael had seen this house as a possession to be claimed. They never understood that it was really a gift to be earned through love, respect, and genuine care. Outside, Thomas's roses were blooming, their fragrance drifting through the open window. The house felt alive, not with the chaos Barbara and Amanda would have brought, but with the peaceful energy Thomas had always cultivated here. In the end, the property trust hadn't just given me a house. It had given me the freedom to honor Thomas's memory in the way he deserved. And somewhere, I knew he was smiling, satisfied that his home had ended up exactly where it belonged.